And David Littleproud joins me now. David, welcome to the show. Well, a year on from the no vote, succeeding at the referendum, why do you say that the Albanese government has abandoned Indigenous Australians?
Well, nothing's happened. Thanks for having me, but nothing's happened. We've had 12 months of missed opportunity. We've had 12 months of nothing. We actually took a principled position as Nationals before everybody else in November last year and said that we wouldn't support the Voice before anyone else did because we saw that this was repeating the mistakes of the past. We were going to create another layer of bureaucracy, which we've had before, which was called ATSIC. It failed those that we represent. From our lived experience, we couldn't support it. But what we did, the very next week after Australians voted, was that Peter Dutton and I walked into that parliament and we moved two motions. One was for a forensic audit of the over $5 billion worth of funding from government agencies that go into closing that gap to make sure that there is value for money for Australians, taxpayers, as well as for a Royal Commission into sexual child abuse in Central Australia. Because Australians gave us a strong indication. They wanted action. They didn't want ideology. They wanted practical reality. They wanted action. And that's why I'm back out here in Alice Springs with Jacinta, listening to elders, understanding the only way to change this is to listen to elders and have local solutions, not regional and national solutions. But this government has been asleep at the wheel. Anthony Albanese's washed his hands of Indigenous Australians. He's done nothing for 12 months. This is a blight on our nation and a blight on him as Prime Minister, who came saying he was going to change the country, but in fact only spent $450 million on dividing us.
David Littleproud, I want to ask you your view on this suggestion by one of the Voice architects, Megan Davis, that a misinformation bill would have helped the Voice secure a victory.
It would have silenced people like myself and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and Warren Mundine. Those two in particular led our nation. What the National Party's position was to give them the oxygen to do that and to give their lived experience about why this was repeating the mistakes of the past, of more bureaucracy, of ATSIC Mark II, of letting them be able to say exactly what was happening out here in Central Australia where the Prime Minister dares not come. That would have been seen in the eyes under this new law as misinformation. You would have silenced Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and Warren Mundine. In what country where more than 103,000 Australians have lost their lives defending the very principle of our freedom of speech, that their message of their lived experience was going to be washed away because the Prime Minister had an ideological view predicated out of Redfern, not out of here in Central Australia? That's not the Australia that those 103,000 Australians defended, nor I, as a custodian of that freedom of speech, want to let go. And we intend to repeal that bill if it gets through. But the reality is Australians spoke, they spoke loudly, and when they do, we should respect that and we should get on with the job of what they've tasked us to do.
Yeah, it's one of the many examples of how the misinformation legislation, as you say, if it goes ahead, could be misused for political purposes. Now, we see today the front page of The Australian, the coalition surge ahead of Labor for the first time in news poll. What do you think the chances are now of Peter Dutton being the next Prime Minister?
Well, I only hope so, because what we need to do is get back to basics. We need strong leadership. And that's what Peter Dutton and I have shown from the Voice all the way through. But I think it's a reflection of what Australians have asked themselves. Do they feel safer and do they feel better off after 2.5 years of Anthony Albanese? And the overwhelming answer to that is no, they don't. They're paying more. We don't feel safer because they've let, again, with what's happening on the streets of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, the ideology of what's happening in the Middle East permeate here into Australia, when what we should do is get back to first principles. Every Australian should ask themselves, if those terror attacks happened in Australia on the 7th of October that happened in Israel, what would they expect the Australian government to do? They would expect their government to pursue those terrorist organisations to any part of the planet and destroy them, to keep their people safe. That's what Israel has done. And when you get to the essence of what's happened is we've stood up for those principles of freedom, and safety and peace-loving people that have come to this country to escape the Middle East, to have that here. But then when you get to the cost of living crisis, about sensible energy policy that'll feed into lower food prices, but also sensible immigration policy, not by cutting it, but by bringing those, we should determine who comes to this country, the skills they have and where we want them to live. We've got a housing crisis and we should give hope to Australians they can own a home, because we're going to bring the best and brightest here to solve our problems, not cower in a corner like Anthony Albanese's done for 2.5 years.
Yep. All right. David Littleproud, thank you very much for joining me today, Nationals leader on the 1-year anniversary of the Voice defeat.